Hello, so in this video we're going to take another look at working with SSH a little bit further. In the first video we were able to kind of understand how do I connect to an SSH server, as well as start to get a little bit introduced to working with a public key and a private key and understanding how to log in and access those accounts. If you remember from last time, if you do from your home directory an ls-a, we're able to see some of those hidden directories as well. So we were learning a bit about this .ssh folder that's been hidden inside our home directory. And just as a quick recap from last time, remember if we cd to .ssh and then we do an ls-a from in here, on the server side we end up having both a public key and a private key in there. We also had this known hosts for someone to whom we've already connected to before. As well as we also had an authorized key file that also might exist on our SSH server. Remember, we were using the Kali machine as a client, so if we do the same thing in this case, cd.ssh, and then do an ls-l inside of here, an ls-a inside of here. Remember, this time we had a known host for people to whom we've connected to. That would be my Metasploitable server. But also we had a direct.txt, and that's where I was able to kind of copy and or steal the private key out of the MSF admin's account, and we saw how we could log in directly to the SSH server just by knowing the private key, and how it did not prompt me for a password, so understanding how that works as well. In the last video too, we saw how we could generate a new public key and private key pair. And this time I'd like to take a look at a little bit more of the back-end server configuration for an SSH server, and understanding how there might be a couple other keys that would be worth generating, and just realizing a little bit more of how SSH can function behind the scenes. So the folder that I'd like us to be aware of here from the start would be a folder that's found in etc and etc. So I'm going to cd to this folder, cd, and it's /etc/ssh, okay? That's the location that we're going to go to specifically for Metasploitable. For some other versions of SSH, there might be a different folder. So again, this depends on which specific version of SSH is actually running your server. So that's something to kind of check around and see what directory actually is it located in, but etc SSH is one that's actually here for my Metasploitable machine. And if I do an ls in here, you'll see that there are a couple configuration files, as well as RSA and DSA public and private key pairs. And these are keys that are used for just general authentication to the server. So that's important to realize that there are some server keys that are also found in here. Last time we were doing private keys and public keys for a specific user, not just for the entire server. Now the file that I'd like us to pay attention to in here is the SSHD config file. So let's take a look at this file, and in order to make a change to it, which we will in just a second, this is a file that we'll need to have elevated privileges to. So I'm going to sudo, let's maybe just use nano to take a look at this, nano or vi, doesn't matter, SSHD _config, and this is one that we're going to take a look at. Now this particular file allows you to modify a lot of the different technical settings of how is this particular version of SSH being deployed. In other words, it's the configuration file. So something that we might want to pay attention to would be, by default, SSH operates off of port 22. However, it's this file that explicitly says what port is SSH going to operate off of for my particular server. So if I wanted to change this, I could come into my configuration file and say, instead of port 22, maybe I'll make it 20,222. So I'll just go 22222. Okay, we'll have 5 of these guys there. So if I were to change my port that this is operating off of, then this is obviously going to change the default way that anyone would be able to connect to my server. So even though it connects by 22, by default, when I type out the SSH command, it automatically goes to 22. These are some things that could be modified. And you'll see there's a lot of different settings in here, things that are set to yes, things that are set to a specific, maybe a specific number, or a specific file path, that if I came in here and I changed any of this stuff, it's going to modify how my specific version of SSH is working. So having a copy of your configuration file after you've configured SSH the way you want it is pretty important in case someone comes in here and screws with this file, or it accidentally gets removed or deleted. So paying attention to this is pretty important. So let's say I want to change the port to which this is operating on. What would I do then? Well, I'm going to press Control X and then Y to actually save my changes. So I'll rewrite over this file. And then I'll just have to restart the service. And again, now you have to know what is the name of the service that actually runs this version of SSH. So I'll do this through a sudo command, and I'll do /etc/init.d/ and then this one is just called SSH. Some of them are SSH, some of them are SSHD. It depends on what you have. But this one for Metasploitable is just SSH. I'll do a space and then do a restart. So just like restarting my networking, I'm going to restart my SSH server, okay? And then it goes and it restarts, okay? And that will now apply the new configuration change. So if you remember over here on my Kali side, I used to SSH to the machine by doing a msf admin at 192.168.1.101. And when I do that this time, you see it says connection refused. Port 22, it explicitly says now, there was no SSH connection at this particular port. So the SSH server should still be available, but it's simply just operating off of a different port now. And the way you would have to do this now is have to do a -p command to specify I'd like to go to a specific port, not the default port. In this case, we went 22222 as the new port. So now when I try to connect, now it says, we found an SSH server at this particular port. I can type in my password and log into the MSF admin account over the SSH server now. So we're seeing how this configuration file is really important to how my specific version of SSH is actually being deployed. If I need to run things off a different port or change one of the default settings, that configuration file is how I would do this. I'm going to disconnect my connection here on the Kali side, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to change it back to port 22. I don't want to leave it on this strange port. So I'll hit 2 up arrows to be able to go to that SSHD config file, and back where I had that line that was port 2222, let's just change it back to 22. I'm going to hit backspace here and change it back to 22. Now the other particular line that I'm kind of interested in is the host key line. A couple lines down, you'll see it actually indicates in the directory where we currently are, /etc//ssh, you notice that's where we do have an SSH host RSA key, which is actually a key pair. There's both a private key as well as a public key that's associated with this. But it's in this particular path is where my server is going to be looking for these keys. So if those keys were not present, maybe the keys were moved, or maybe an attacker came in and changed the path. Someone could come in here, as we see here, and start changing paths and changing numbers, and that's going to change how I expect a SSH server might behave by default. Now, I'm not actually going to change these paths, but I just want you to realize that there is a path that's built into this configuration file. So I'll save my change for the ports, rewrite this file, and I'll restart my SSH server, hit 2 up arrows, and do my initd SSH restart again to bring me back to port 22. Okay, and just pay attention again when I do my ls. You'll see these are those host keys that we were talking about. So the configuration file is specifically looking for these host keys in order to actually change things. Now, we saw last time how if somebody were actually to steal my private key, that can cause a lot of problems. Someone would be able to access my SSH server without knowing any of the passwords for accounts. So this is something that we definitely want to pay attention to. And if I have an SSH deployment that I simply don't trust, does someone know my public key or my private key, then it is good to know how to generate a new one. So we did this last time by doing SSH-keygen. There was a utility that could do this for us, and we ended up specifying a type by doing a -t and then saying RSA. And then the next thing was, well, where's the file that you'd like to put this into? So I could overwrite an existing key pair by saying, you know what, I don't trust that public key and that private key anymore. Let me simply go in and make a new one. And we have this in /etc/ what do we have? SSH/SSH_host_RSA key. Okay, so this is the one that we'd like to actually go and rewrite. And let's see, do I need privileges to actually be able to do this? Nope, it looks like it's going to run it. It says, hey, there's a pair that already exists. Are you sure you want to overwrite this? I'm going to say yes. I do want to overwrite this pair. I'm going to trash the old pair and make a new one. I'm not going to have a passphrase for this key. Just hit enter twice. Yeah, we got a permission denied. We got to do this again. Just do this again by running a sudo before this. Sudo. Okay, and then we'll be able to overwrite this. Yes. Enter, enter. And there we go. And you see it says right above your last line, you have a new key fingerprint for the server. And mine happens to be 2B, EC, 44, CB, and so on. Okay, and that ends up being the new fingerprint. Now, if you remember before, on the client side, when you contacted a server that you had never seen before, it actually said, do you want to trust this fingerprint? So here's where that fingerprint, we just ended up resetting it for the server and came up with a new pair. So if I were to try connecting by default, just a normal connection, not without any special ports or anything like that, just do an SSH MSF admin at 192.168.1.101, what's going to happen? It's going to hit enter and say, hey, I remember this host. I've connected to this host before, and you're connecting to someone, and the keys are different. Okay? And it's going to say, I do not trust this connection anymore. Okay? And a lot of this comes down to, if you do your ls in your .ssh folder, remember, we have this known host file, and the known host file is what was keeping track of that fingerprint that was associated with 192.168.1.101. So what we have here is we have a mismatch, and the computer thinks, the client thinks that there's some funny business going on, and maybe you're being man in the middle, maybe there's some type of attack going on, or simply maybe I don't trust the identity of the server anymore. So there's kind of a quick way to fix this, and the quick way to fix this would simply be to clear out my known host file. Now the other way to do it would be to add the new identity to the file. But in this case, I'm going to remove my known host file. So I'm going to go and I'm going to do an RM on my known hosts. And now when I do my ls, you'll see I've trashed the known host file. So now he's not going to know what the previous ID was. I go back and I say, let's do a connect to it again, SSH to MSF admin at this account. And you'll say, hey, here's the new fingerprint that I've never seen before. Are you sure you'd like to trust this? And then we go ahead and say yes. And then that will add us back to the list of known hosts. We'll make a new known host file which has the new identity of the server. So learning how to interact with your known hosts, understanding how if you change the keys on your server, every single client that tries connecting to your server, anybody who's already connected is going to get this message. Likewise, knowing that if you ever see this message, what it means is the server has changed identities. Are you sure you still trust the new identity or not? It kind of gives you a warning about that. So I'm going to hit exit here and just disconnect from the server as well. So just to kind of recap here, learning how to do this SSH keygen is really, really important for both generating keys for your SSH server as well as generating keys for a particular user, such as MSF admin. Also knowing how to go to this SSHD configuration file, restarting the service if any changes have been made, having backups of this file, noticing the file paths that these things are pointing to. All of these are really good fundamental knowledge for how to set up, configure, and or secure an operating SSH server.